The stage adaptation of Harper Lee's classic American novel To Kill a Mockingbird officially opened December 13th, 2018 at Broadway's Shubert Theater. The play not only gives new life to Lee's enduring tale, it marks the return of writer Aaron Sorkin back to Broadway. For Sorkin, justice comes in communicating the story of attorney Atticus Finch, who defended a black man falsely accused of raping a white woman in their small Alabama hometown. Here, Sorkin spoke to Playbill's Ruthie Fierberg about his love for the theater, using his signature style to tell Mockingbird's story, and what's next.
In the timeline of Aaron Sorkin, I feel like people sort of skip ahead to the film version of A Few Good Men, and then it takes off with The American President and The West Wing and The Social Network much later, and people don't realize that you come from theater and that you got your BFA in musical theater.
Before To Kill a Mockingbird, oftentimes I'd be doing an interview, and the interviewer would say, "Now, you used to be a playwright, right?" And I'd die a little bit inside because I am still.
I think you're still a playwright. I think you've always been a playwright.
I'm an accidental writer of movies and television. It's a very happy accident. I love movies and television, but all I ever wanted to be was a playwright. It's what I studied. I grew up in and then around New York, and as a little kid, my parents took me to the theater all the time.
Is that what made you first fall in love with it?
Yes. My parents took me to the theater. I had one of those experiences that people talk about. My first show was Man of La Mancha, and when at House to Half, when the house lights started going down, I just got this feeling. It was like I was in a cathedral, and that incredible overture starts, and then the scariest staircase in all of theater comes down, and I couldn't get enough. There was no such thing as a bad show. I went all the time. When I got older and broke, I would second act shows. So there are plays I've seen the second act of 100 times and I've only read the first act.
What's the show that if you could see the whole thing that you only saw the second act of, you'd want to see it?
Part of what happened was my parents took me to see plays that I was just too young to understand when I saw them, like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf when I was 9 years old. I had no idea what was going on up there, but I loved the sound of dialogue. It sounded like music to me, and I grew up wanting to imitate that sound. But if I could teleport back in time, I'd love to go and see that play again, now being able to understand what was going on.
So you were always going after playwriting, even though the BFA was musical theater, that was performing?
When I was in high school, I thought that I was going to be an actor, and I was in all the drama club shows and all the community theater shows. I went to a great theater program at Syracuse University, and I got a BFA in musical theater. But by the time I was a senior, I knew that while my classmates were learning how to be an actor, it was just, all of the training was just going to a different part of my brain, and I was kind of learning what a play was. And once I graduated, I powered up. It was just called a Macintosh then, at 128K, and started writing for pleasure for the first time. Started writing dialogue.
And so dialogue was always your way in.
Dialogue
You're the master of dialogue.
Well, that's very nice of you to say that. Dialogue was always my way in, and I did. It's always, like I said, it sounded like music to me, and I wanted to imitate that sound. But remember, going back to Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and my not understanding what was going on stage, plot has always been my Achilles heel, and I felt like it's kind of a necessary intrusion, plot, I have to do it to write dialogue.
But were you always a more is more type of writer with dialogue?
I think I know what you're asking.
You just pack a punch, and I love the rhythm of listening to Sorkin. As you know it when you hear it, And I love listening to the rhythm, and some people say that's not how people talk, and I say, well, we should. We should talk at that level.
Well, growing up in my house, around my dinner table, anybody who used one word when they could have used 10 just wasn't trying hard enough. So it comes from that. As for that's not how people really talk, you know, there are great writers who what they do, it's sort of the dialogue equivalent of photorealism. Like what makes their dialogue great is that they are trying to imitate the sound of people talking. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm writing dialogue. People and characters are different. People's lives don't play out in a series of scenes that form a narrative. There's all different kinds of dialogue, from dialogue that rhymes and is in iambic pentameter to minimalist dialogue, where it's the things that aren't said that are important. I write what I write. Every once in a while, I am going for the sound of reality, but it's seldom. But I'm sorry, I will tell you, as will any actor that I've worked with, particularly the Mockingbird cast, I script every sound that the actors make. Ums, ahs, the little hiccups and stutters that I like. That's not going for reality, though. Again, it's percussion.
So speaking of the dialogue of To Kill a Mockingbird, you and I spoke back in 2016 over the phone before your master class, and we were talking about it. You were writing the first draft, and then we spoke again right before the show opened, and you spoke of that first draft saying the best thing you could say was that it was harmless. And I'm wondering, what is the thing that you were aiming for? You don't want to be able to say that it's harmless. How do you want to be able to describe your work, this work?
Well, the first thing that I was aiming for turned out to be the wrong thing to aim for. The first thing that I was aiming for was to kind of move an expensive, antique, priceless artifact, a vase, from this table to that table, without breaking it or getting fingerprints on it at all. It was my goal was to kind of get out of the way of it, it was first do no harm. Okay, that's no way to write a play, and it didn't work. As he said, the best thing that you could say about it was that it was harmless, which is not really what you want from a
right. So
play.
You don't want harmless theater. You want what type of theater excites you? What type of theater do you like to write?
I think honestly that all the words you just used in that question is what I'm going for. Exciting, thrilling, theatrical. Okay, I want to give people the feeling that I had and still have when I go to the theater. And by the way, that it's, I don't write things that are meant to be read. I write things that are meant to be performed. So it's a collaboration. It's a collaboration with Bart, the director, with our killer designers, and with this incredible cast. And watching it, we've had, thanks to our producer Scott Rudin, we had a very luxurious rehearsal process, starting a year and a half before the play opened, doing table reads, doing labs, then 6 weeks of rehearsal and 6 weeks of previews, constant work. But the first piece of important work that was done was throwing out that first draft, saying, I'm not going to swaddle this in bubble wrap and kind of lovingly transfer it to a theater. I'm not going to pretend that I'm writing it in 1960, and I'm not going to try to do a Harper Lee impersonation. I've been asked to write a play, and that's what I have to do.
And here we sit.
Let the fruit fly.
And here we sit. Aside from the memory play conceit, is there anything that still carried over from that first draft? Did you keep anything?
I restructured the whole thing, but I think that's the least important change that I made. The big change that I made was making Atticus an honest-to-God protagonist, which he is not in the book. Scout's the protagonist.
Right.
A protagonist, we know, has to be put through something, and he has to change as a result of it. And he has to have a flaw.
Which we'll talk about.
Okay.
We'll talk about why was it always a memory play? Why did it come to you in that way?
I think that it came to me in that way because even though the decision to cast adults as the kids wouldn't be made until later, from the beginning I was writing it with adults in mind playing Scout, Jem, and Dill. And so the only way to do that would be as a memory play. Now there is a memory voice. Harper Lee wrote a memory voice in the book too. There is an adult Scout that drifts in and out. And then in Horton Foote's screenplay for the movie, there's very little voiceover narration, but when it's there, it's an adult woman playing Scout. But the real reason I did it was I knew I don't really write with actors in mind. I'm playing all the parts. I'm talking out loud and jumping around. And in writing Scout particularly, but all three of them, Scout particularly, I just wasn't seeing or hearing a kid on stage doing it. And so to justify that, it had to be a memory. And the memory aspect also became more interesting to me when I realized that, and I should give a warning, there's going to be a spoiler here for anybody who's never read the book or seen the movie. There's a spoiler here. But the fact that Atticus's moral goodness, his morally sound footing, is never questioned in the book, in spite of the fact, here's the spoiler, that the story ends with him covering up a murder. And nobody says, is that right or wrong? Or, gee, couldn't you have helped Tom Robinson out the same way you helped out Boo Radley? We never asked those questions in my 8th grade class or anything.
Me neither.
Suddenly the idea of a memory of Scout questioning, wait, he fell on his knife. It doesn't quite make sense to me. I need to go back in time and put this together.
How many years are in between in your mind?
It's a perfectly fair question. All we know, and I come from the Mamet school of we don't know anything except what's in the script. In other words, if the actor wants to know what this character got for Christmas when they were 12 years old, and there's no scene in the script when they're 12 years old, and nobody ever says, hey, remember that fire truck that I got you when you were 12 years old? They were never 12 years old, and there wasn't a Christmas. They're born when the curtain goes up, they die when the curtain goes down. So all we know about Scout and her age is that she went to law school. So she's something older than 24. But the real answer to the question is she's whatever age Celia Keenan Bolger is.
In terms of the way that the play has developed and shifted over time, one of the things that you said is that the trial had to come so much sooner than it does in the book. And when I saw the show, I thought to myself, oh, whoa, it not just sooner, this is it. We start off running. What did that help you realize, putting it earlier? What did that help you do in terms of writing forward from that point?
You begin to realize some of the differences between a book and a play. With a book, you can be ruminative, which Harper Lee is for 157 pages before the trial starts. We go through a bunch of summers with Scout, Jem, and Dill, and it's very atmospheric and it's wonderful in a novel.
You get internal monologue in a novel.
Yeah, that's right. Which unless a character is going to turn face front and give you their internal monologue instead of their external monologue, you can't do in a play. I knew that we couldn't ruminate for the first act and then say all rise in the second. That we had to be off to the races right from the beginning. So the first thing that happens is the curtain goes up and you're looking at not at all what you expected to be looking at, right? You thought you were going to be looking at a front porch or a bucolic rural street, but we're looking at what appears to be an abandoned warehouse. The paint is peeling, there's broken glass.
Right, like a barn setting almost.
Yeah, whatever that space is, that it's a theater space. And originally it was going to be the back wall of the Shubert Theater, but the back wall of the Shubert Theater just didn't look enough like the back wall of the Shubert Theater for Miriam Buther's taste, our set designer.
She's
so
brilliant.
I'll
Trust
say
her.
she is.
Trust her.
And the combination of Miriam, Jennifer Tipton, and Anna Roth, and Scott Lair with the sound. Incredible job with, of course, Bart. We see a place that looks like it hasn't been revisited in 50 years since the novel came out. It shakes you up a little bit. Hang on, this is different from what I'm used to. And the first words out of Scout's mouth are something didn't make sense. So what happens in that first scene is they question everything that we were taught in 8th grade about this book. And that's the cue between Miriam, Jennifer, those actors, the text, the staging. That's the cue to the audience of
we're in a play.
Get everything out of your head. You're going to need to come along with us for a while. And then all rise.
So speaking of All Rise, I think two things happened with the trial coming that soon. You get two Sorkin signatures to me. You get the incredible entrance by Jeff Daniels as Atticus Finch, and you get this mantra of All Rise. Mm-hmm. How do you write an entrance? I was having sincere Josiah Bartlett West Wing pilot flashbacks when he enters that courtroom. How do you write an entrance that packs a punch that way and doesn't feel like a given?
I love Jeff's entrance, and I particularly love the robust round of applause that he gets. I love Jeff, and how hard. This is the third time we've worked together. So
right.
This isn't the first time I've seen him work hard. It's the first time I've seen him work hard for a year and a half on one thing. You know, in television, you get a day or two to prepare a scene. When we did Steve Jobs together, there were a few weeks of rehearsal. Here I got to watch him sort of run the whole length of the field.
And he is Jeff Daniels. I mean, entrance applause is nothing new in the theater, but I feel like the moment earns it as much as the name does.
I have the kids kind of assemble the courtroom, and then when I got to All Rise, I just kind of stopped for a moment and thought, I can plant a flag here and have Scout talk about what this play is really about. And I kind of got to the end of the first act and thought, why don't I reprise All Rise? And then I got to the end of the second act and did it again. And that's how it happened. I won't lie. I mean, I knew that Atticus deserves an entrance. That here's Atticus. You want to frame him. So.
But it's also, that's interesting too, because you're answering to almost that collective cry of the nation and the expectations of what Atticus has come to be as a literary figure before you end up dissecting and questioning.
Yeah.
It makes it all the more significant.
But let me just say that all of the things that you're talking about, all of which happen in the first 5 minutes of the play, are all theatrical things you can't do in a play, things you can't do in a movie. And I love doing things in a theater that you can only do in a theater.
So that was actually my next question, because I know that you like stagecraft, and I know that you were excited to collaborate with Bart, your director, and so aside from that entrance, maybe, is there something else that you wrote in that you knew you could only accomplish on stage that you can't accomplish in the other media?
Everything, because one of the great luxuries was that there was a director before I started writing, and it was Bart. I got to, ordinarily you'd write a script, you'd go out to directors, but Scott put Bart and me together from the beginning. I was able to say to Bart, listen, off the top of my head, I don't know, first of all, I don't know what I'm going to write, but second, I don't know how we're going to get from a front porch to a courtroom to Boo Radley's window to a bedroom to a jail cell. Is it okay if I just write it and let you worry about all that? And he said, sure. So
God bless him.
God bless him indeed. So if you looked at the script, you'd see very little description.
What is something that Bart brought out in you, maybe even in the rehearsal room, that he helped extricate during the process?
A lot. And I'm glad you asked that too, because I wouldn't want anyone to think of Bart as just a master at staging, which he is. In his spare time, he directs operas at the Met. He's also great at bringing out nuanced performances from terrific actors, and he's a great script editor for me. So there were things, I would say, in the relationship between Jem and Atticus that explode in a second act scene that didn't go in until about 2 weeks before opening night.
Wow.
We started previews without it, and I look at it now and think, can we get the names of everyone who saw the first 4 weeks of previews without that scene, invite them back to the play on me to see it with the scene, because it makes all the difference.
What did that scene unlock for you?
Everything about Jem, and the reason that Jem is in the play. It articulates Atticus's problem. He is imperfect in the play. In the book, he's kind of a marble figure, a marble statue. This is the man with all the answers. In the play, he wrestles with the questions.
In terms of those questions that he's wrestling with, what is the challenge of externalizing those questions? And is this your way of processing similar questions? Do you process through your playwriting?
Yeah, I do. I wish that I could fool people into believing that my final draft was my first draft and that's what I actually intended to do all along. But it takes a while for you to ask yourself the right questions.
What are the primary questions for you that Atticus needs to answer for himself?
Primarily, Atticus's thing is that there is fundamental goodness in everyone, and that what you have to do is crawl around inside someone else's skin before you can really understand them. He, throughout the book, tolerates intolerance. I wouldn't want anyone to think that in writing this play, I set out to correct Harper Lee's mistakes. She made no mistakes. She wrote the novel she wanted to write. It has earned its place on America's bookshelf.
And we've made clear that this is being presented on a stage in 2019.
That's right. What I hope, what I would hope is that because so many of us read the play in school and have a discussion about it, that we can add to that discussion. Like tolerating intolerance. What's that about? Atticus, when he makes his kids apologize to people they were rude to because those people used the N-word, is he disrespecting Calpurnia, who is a member of this family? Is there goodness? Is there fundamental goodness in everyone? It helped, by the way, that in the midst of all this, Donald Trump stood up and said, there are fine people on both sides.
Right.
And I thought, holy cow, what's the difference between what he just said and what Atticus says throughout the book? I mean, I know there's a difference. Atticus is coming from a place of goodness. He means well. He's appealing to our better angels. The other is not. He's coming from a place of hatred, but they are saying the same thing. And
if Donald Trump doesn't say that, do you have the aha moment of the flaw?
I'm not sure. It's entirely possible that I owe him flowers. The sad truth is that if he hadn't said that, someone else would have. He's not the only one. Yeah.
Bart is a genius with revivals for a reason too. It's very much, stories seem to change, but stories don't change. Audiences and people change.
That's right.
And I have to imagine that he was instrumental in that reframing and the present day lens, if you will.
He's got My Fair Lady.
Right.
Right. In which he needed to figure out how to end My Fair Lady today in a way that would be palatable to audiences in 2019. So he and I were always on the same page with regard to that. If anything, Bart actually would rein me in slightly on something that where he felt I was hitting the nail a little too hard.
Well, because I also think there has to be a balance between making it present day, being cognizant, and also pushing the boundaries of the reality of the time period that your play is set in.
Exactly right, because you don't want the play to kind of unzip itself and have people, say it's 2019 now. Get it? You want that to occur to the audience on its own. It's a very a delicate balance. One of the things that I did was in the book, it's just a bunch of violent racists who show up at the jailhouse to lynch Tom Robinson. I called them what they almost surely were, a Klan. So Bob Ewell and the Klansmen come there. They are turned away by, of all people, Scout, diffuses that. And Bob Ewell had a line before he left. He turned to Atticus and said, let's see if I can remember a line that I cut 3.5 months ago. He turned to Atticus and he said, don't ever underestimate the rage that runs just beneath the surface of ordinary people. That rage can turn itself into a revolution. You know how I know? Because it always does. And walks off. And those same people who saw the previews without the gem scene saw that line at the end of the first act, and Bart talked to me for a while. He said he felt that it was the only place in the play where he felt like I had taken over and was showing the audience, look, this is about today, when they were already with us. So I do what Bart tells me. Okay.
I want to rewind to the All Rise mantra. Does coming up with a mantra like that, or just a recurring phrase, help guide you through a narrative of where you're going and what you're trying to say?
When you are able to say to an audience, from now on, when you hear this, when I say this, it means this. It doesn't just mean get out of your seat. It means this. It can be helpful. It's nice.
All Rise, it's one of those things that seems so obvious because you're set around a courtroom and everything, but and like she said, the call to something greater. Did that come to you early on?
I had it pretty early on, but I certainly didn't think that it was going to have the kind of life that it's had. When I came back after opening night, opening night was December 13th, and all through previews, the theater, the Shubert Theater, had been covered in quotes about the book. When I came back a few weeks later, I check in on the play every few weeks. When I came back a few weeks later, the theater was now covered in quotes about the play, and I stood there stunned because all over the place I saw "All Rise," that so many critics had used that, it. I don't know. It feels great when
it works that way.
When it works at all. When it works, it just doesn't happen often. And people who are beginners at golf, who try golf, will talk about how they're terrible and they chop up the whole course, and but just for some reason, one time they will hit an actual golf shot, and it's beautiful, and it sounds beautiful, and it looks beautiful, and that's why they keep coming back. And writing can be, for me, frustrating. It's very difficult. So those rare times when you can get what's in your head through your arms onto the page, hand the pages to someone else, have it happen on stage, and have it be even better than what you'd imagine because of the collaboration, because it's a triumph of collaboration. That's why you keep coming back, like the golfer who hits the golf shot.
But you managed to put a message and a calling, almost like All Rise, amidst everything else you had to cover. I forgot about Mrs. Henry DuBose. I forgot about Miss Stephanie. I forgot about Mr. D's huge symbolic plotline.
Sure.
How do you cram all of that in there, to be true to this book and to give people the story they grew up with, while also feeling like it's not shoved in?
You take those moments that that you thought were swell in 8th grade, but now kind of feel like a pebble in your shoe, that there's something wrong. You think about what the problem is, and you fly right into the teeth of it. The book ends with Atticus is sitting by Jem's bed. Jem's going to have to sleep through the night. He's been given a shot. In the morning, he'll be taken to the hospital. And Harper Lee's scout says that he was sitting by the bed, and that's where he would be in the morning. In other words, it was a symbol of steadiness, that don't worry, everything will be the same. Well, I'm sure I found that comforting in 8th grade. Now I found it wrong. I don't want an Atticus who is still sitting by the bed in the morning. You figure out what troubled you. You take a stern shower because you realize that what you're going to do, that what you're essentially doing, is saying, I have a problem with the choice Harper Lee made right here, and I am making a different choice, but one that I honestly feel is appropriate for To Kill a Mockingbird in 2019. We are doing, in the age of Me Too, we're doing a play about a woman who falsely accuses a man of rape. We were aware of that, and it made us think about a lot of things. Something that I like, and this was Bart, this isn't written in stage direction, is that during the trial, he has Scout and Jem and Dill kind of roaming around like ghosts. They're not seated in the gallery. They'll be hanging out behind the witness chair or leaning against the jury box. And there's one stretch when we're hearing about how horrible Mayella's life is. When Scout goes and stands by Mayella and is really able to convey that there's more than one victim in this courtroom.
And they also live side by side, right? That's the other thing, is that the play isn't a replacement.
And I would never suggest to anyone, don't read the book because it's out of date. Absolutely read the book. Read it in school. But as I said before, I just hope that the conversation, that we can add to the conversation now. Here's another example. My favorite scene always in the book and in the movie, it was the same as my father's favorite scene in the book and the movie.
Which
And
was?
the end of the trial. If anybody minds about spoilers, hit mute right now. Atticus is lost. He's putting his papers back in the briefcase, and everyone in the courtroom is cleared out. It's empty, except for the people in what they called the colored section, okay, who are silently standing out of respect for Atticus as he walks out, and the Reverend Sykes turns to Scout, who Scout and Jem are the only two white people up there because they had to sneak in, says, stand up, Miss Jane Louise, your daddy's passing, okay? Always put a lump in my throat, always put a lump in my father's throat. But what I was gonna say was, always my favorite scene. And then I reread the book, and I thought, you know, I'll bet this is the favorite scene of 0 people who aren't white. And I started to think about, why do I love this scene so much? Why it's, you know, as a writer, you try to be a diagnostician. When you love something, when you don't love something, you know, why didn't that work for me? Why did that work for me? And in this case, I realized that what I was choking up at was the fact that these people sitting in the colored section weren't burning the courthouse down, they weren't rioting in the streets, they weren't chanting no justice, no peace. They were showing gratitude to the white man who just lost the case, by the way, but they were showing gratitude to the white guy, and that those people in the balcony, they were extras in this movie. I mean, as a filmmaker, knowing that they were extras in the movie, and that their job was to make me feel proud of this white guy, and that what, you know, as a liberal guy, what I want is for marginalized people to tell me I'm one of the good ones. Once I realized that, I could not have that scene in the movie anymore, in the play anymore, and I flew into the teeth of it, and that's how Calpurnia happened.
I almost feel like you put theater references in your trials and your government shows, and now here we have a trial at the very center of this piece that's brought you back to theater. Do you just love the law? Are you fascinated by that in general? I mean, I heard that post hoc, I was like, post hoc ergo propter hoc, we're back? Like posse comitatus, yes,
you know
we're here again.
That line is just for you, okay? It was just for people who could remember episode 2 of The West Wing, okay? I love courtroom dramas. Again, growing up, and now they're sort of my favorite genre, but they, as a dramatist, it's so clear what the intention and the obstacle is, what the stakes are, what the two sides are, and the jury is the audience is a stand-in for the jury in those 12 people, whether we ever see them or not.
I was going to ask if that was your idea or Bart's idea, whether
Mr.
to
Scher's
have that
idea.
box empty.
Yes. It was tricky, though. We all had to find our way through that. I love the empty jury box, but what Bart realized he couldn't do was have any character reference the jury box. In other words, if Atticus, in his closing argument, starts talking to empty chairs, he's going to look like Clint Eastwood at the Republican convention, right? He's just going to draw our attention to the fact that, wait a second, throughout the entire play, you have never talked to anyone who wasn't there. So no one could reference the jury box. It was just there for the audience to see.
But it's the courtroom that draws you in.
Yes, and I had always, in writing it, I always assumed that the audience would be the jury, that whenever anybody saw things in the jury, they would be looking out. Bart and Miriam had another idea, and it was the better idea.
The themes in the show were always, racism, justice,
what it means
community.
To be a person, what is morality, what is decency, and I like heroes who don't wear capes. Can't we all simply by, and this is contained in Scout's last speech, simply by trying to be better, simply by wanting to, doesn't that give us half a grade point on your GPA?
Yeah, but there also seem to be themes of elitism and education and those things that you seem to add in.
Yes, you are talking about Bob Ewell, and to an extent Mayella. We have in the country, it's not a new thing, we've had it for a long time. Friction between what are called the elites and everybody else. It's a conversation that bothers me a lot because to win elections, you have to appeal to people who are turned off by elites. You have to ignore the difference between the word elite and elitist. There's nothing wrong with being elite. An elitist would be somebody who looks down at someone. And so we have demonized brains. He thinks he's so smart. He's such a know-it-all. And there was an opportunity to examine that in this. It's a big reason why Bob Ewell hates so many people, and particularly Atticus. There was more there than just he's defending a black man. He also wears glasses, and I could go after that. He reads books. Bob Ewell would hate that, and all leading to Atticus's explosion of you think I'm better than you because I am. I look down at you because down is where you are.
If there's any story you could bring to the American stage, what is the story you want to tell on stage?
Okay, if Scott Rudin calls me and says, I want you to adapt Catcher in the Rye, I'm hanging up and just diving under the bed. I'm not doing it. I don't know. Right now I'm kind of enjoying this, and I do love the cast and the crew. My favorite place to be is backstage at 7:45, hanging out with them.